And I'll be moderating this evening, which means I get to throw a few questions at these guys, and then later I can take your questions. We've got a lot more to talk about tonight than we can fit into 1 hour. So we do encourage you all to stay after. We have a few refreshments, and mix it up out there in the gallery and talk with our two guests here. Let me say a few words, and then let them say a few words, and then we'll get this rolling. So Paul Reed is an archaeologist with Archaeology Southwest, which is based down in Tucson. He's been here in Taos for about 10 years, and he's done a great deal of work, probably 40 years worth of archaeology, and quite knowledgeable about everything that goes on here in the state of New Mexico and its bordering states. So he'll give us his perspective, and he describes himself as an evolving archaeologist, and I'll let him explain what that means. Kevin Whitefeather is a member of Taos Pueblo, and Kevin and I have worked together to try and get his native cultural tours off the ground here, which have worked out pretty well, I think. Kevin has a shop that some of you may want to visit when you're on Taos Pueblo. It's right there facing the plaza of Taos Pueblo, and it was started by his father, Jimmy Morningtalk. Right? So I'm sure Kevin's perspective will be interesting for those of you who haven't had a chance to meet with him before. So I'll let each of you say a few words about your backgrounds, and we'll go from there.
Good evening, everybody. Again, my name is Kevin Whitefeather, and I'm from the native Red Willow community here. We're also known as Taos Pueblo. But before we start here, as is customary with anything that we start as a native people, we always start off with a short prayer for a good evening for everybody. So if I could have everybody stand, I'll say a few words in my native people language as we start this. Malaho boy hilstomach or the white amek see when I'm a white cat time for Malaho. Gui kima bamek kima suma go, gui kinamayaki or gui about tutor, gui kima koyaki, gui kima bamek or gui kima beer one naki. A Malaho Iwa, tooth and a king. Gui a Malaho or tutor, when I'm white, I can not do one, there's a Malaho. We do my yaw and a Malaho who talk. So folks can have a seat. As William mentioned earlier, he's been helping me from the very inception of creating cultural tours, and for the longest time I've been wanting to do this to be able to share with all cultures about who we are as a native people, especially here in the Taos area. There's a lot of you out here that live in Taos, but I don't think I've ever really stepped foot on tribal lands, or really the experience that we could all share together in this wonderful valley that we have. As they say, we've been here since time immemorial in this whole area, so there is a deep respect for everything that we have in Mother Earth. And that's what I want to share with everybody, is that welcoming to everybody here, newcomers, people who have been in this valley for as long as you have. And it's creating a dialogue that we could all share and we could all communicate in the right ways. By having this kind of a dialogue, it brings about that respect about who we are, all of us. we live in a relatively small community, so, as we're told every day, to pray, we pray for all of humanity, not just ourselves as Native people, we pray for all of you that are here, no matter where we are. Like I say, Mother Earth, the water that we have, very sacred to us. We pray to the sun, to the moon. All things have meaning in this world today. Wherever we go is our church. So, with that, again, just a little background about myself. I am a graduate of the Santa Fe Indian School in Santa Fe, New Mexico, the New Mexico Military Institute in Roswell, New Mexico, and the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. So I've been doing tours during the time that I was in college, and I've always felt that, that people that visited Taos Pueblo from far away, it was really never enough time to be able to explain who we are as a culture. Until you really sit down with people from the Pueblo and hear that side of who we are, then, you don't really understand it until you hear it from the native voice. Now for many, many, many centuries, you've always heard it from the other side. But now I think it's given us an opportunity to be able to share with you folks from us as a native culture, as to who we really are. So again, we'll open this up to questions later on, but I want to again pass this on to Paul and give him a few minutes to introduce himself as well.
Well, thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Bill, for bringing us all together. My name is Paul Reed. I work for Archaeology Southwest, which is a nonprofit organization that, as Bill said, is centered in Tucson. I've worked for the organization for about 23 years now. A good chunk of that was over in Farmington, New Mexico. And as Bill said, I've been here about 10 years, and I am thoroughly infected with Taos. So I'm going to be here until the time that I pass. And I'm thrilled to be here with you tonight and with Kevin and Bill. So I've been fortunate to work for Archaeology Southwest for about 23 years in New Mexico, and I've worked as an archaeologist for 40 years next year. So as part of that time, I've gone through really a transformation, and that's in part why I'm on the stage here tonight. I'll talk a little bit about that. Over the last about 15 years, I've been fortunate to work closely with Native American groups across the Southwest, including most of New Mexico's 23 pueblos and tribes, with the Hopi tribe, with the Navajo Nation, and with several Apache groups in Arizona, and with the Ute tribes of Arizona and, Colorado and Utah. Much of this work that we've done recently has been focused on assisting the national parks and monuments in our region in managing their landscapes and engaging with the tribal communities that surround those landscapes. Now, this is something that our federal government, as many of you are well aware, has not done a great job with historically, right? Native peoples have been moved off lands, and most of our national parks and monuments were originally commons lands for a variety of different tribal groups. And so those were taken out of their hands, put into the parks, and the Park Service was very slow to return to a policy of engaging with tribes. I'm happy to say, I think there's still a lot of progress to be made there, but they're starting to take the steps to do that, and we've been able to help out in a number of areas. I was also deeply involved in the decades-long effort to protect the Greater Chaco landscape from the threat of oil and gas development. This is something that's been very close to my heart over that time period. Last year, Interior Secretary Deb Haaland, the first Native American woman to serve in that role, signed an order establishing a 20-year zone of protection around Chaco. Now, of course, with the change in politics, we're not going to focus a lot on that tonight. But a lot of the things all of us care about in this room are going to, again, be threatened. I don't think that that's a big stretch. So get your advocacy ready, folks. That's the only thing I'll say about politics. I like to describe myself, as Bill said, as an evolving archaeologist and anthropologist. I was trained and educated with a very scientifically dominant view of the past. This was 40 years ago. I got my education at New Mexico State University, and very much of archaeology of science, where the scientists, we didn't have Jesus conflicts. We weren't coming to save the world, but we were going to do science in the best possible way. What I've learned over the last couple decades of working with Native peoples is science doesn't always serve Native groups. So this is something that I've gone through as a personal transformation to try and figure out how to be of most use in my remaining years. That sounds dire, but the time that I have left in the career, and to partner with people like Kevin. So I'm thrilled to be able to do that and start in this small way tonight to do that, continue to do that work. So why am I here right now? Well, I met Bill a few months ago at a party at a neighbor's house, and Bill and I started to talk about Chaco, and he then cooked up this scheme, which was great, to introduce Kevin and I. I did a tour with Kevin and a couple of my friends here in the audience a few weeks ago, and we basically thought about how to come together as, Kevin, of course, a Taos Pueblo native, me as an archaeologist and anthropologist, and how we could get in front of an audience here and talk about the issues that we're facing together, and how to sort of take some of that on head on and really think about, as Kevin said, the best ways to bring peoples together. You know, a lot of what gets focused on in our country, of course, is dividing people. And I think now more than ever, we need to focus more on uniting people and thinking about ways to do that. Of course, the history of European colonialism in America is full of terrible tales and horrible genocide, disruption, colonialism, all of those worst effects. And I'm really sad to say, in some ways, as an archaeologist, that archaeology played a key role in that colonial process over the last 150 years. I think as a discipline, archaeology and anthropology are emerging from what I think of as really dark days, and we're deciding that we need to think a lot harder about the issues and put concerns that indigenous people, that Native people have, much more in the forefront of everything we do. And I'm happy to have a small part in that. Our organization, there's a larger organization called the Society for American Archaeology. They have recently adopted some new principles and really some changes in how our discipline, our field as a whole, engages with Native folks. If we think briefly about the history of Taos Pueblo, I can throw out a couple archaeological things. Kevin has a depth of knowledge, as do many of the elders at Taos Pueblo. My friend and colleague, an archaeologist that many of you might know, Jeff Boyer, who grew up in this area, has summarized a little bit about Taos's archaeological history in a recent book called Taos Topical History, but I would encourage you to pick that up. We know that indigenous people have lived in the Taos area for at least 12 to 14,000 years. I would suspect that that timeline is deeper than that. And that I wouldn't claim is exactly the time immemorial that Kevin talks about and other indigenous people do, but it's a very, very, very long time. Until just a couple of thousand years ago, most of the residents in this area made their living doing a combination of gathering and hunting across the vast stretches here, and farming came to the area about 2 millennia ago, roughly. And so therefore we know that Taos Pueblo ancestors have been in this area for a very, very, very long time. Very little actual archaeological work was done at Taos Pueblo, and I think that that's actually a benefit, because a lot of the pueblos in New Mexico were excavated without the consent of folks in the Pueblo. Some work was done for different reasons, not always talking to Pueblo elders and leaders to get that done correctly. What archaeologists would say about Taos Pueblo is that there are early dates, streaming dates from the Pueblo in the 1100s and 1200s. And that I don't think is definitive for this is exactly when it was built. But Taos says, quite rightly, Taos Pueblo folks say that they are the oldest occupied place in America. And even though our friends at Acoma, who may not be in the audience, might disagree, right? There is great time depth, folks, and it's not about who's first. Old Arrivee and the Hopi Mesas in Arizona also dates to that time zone, at least 800, 900, 1,000 years ago. So folks have been around this a very, very long time. I know that you all are sensitive folks, and you've come to this and you understand that intuitively. But I think sometimes we forget the time depth of indigenous peoples in our midst. I want to conclude my little preamble here with just mentioning that Blue Lake was unlawfully taken from Taos Pueblo in 1906, and that Taos engaged in a decades-long battle with multiple leaders, multiple governors, and religious leaders to get that back. It was returned with a large piece of land in 1970, and I think that was way overdue, but a very important milestone in the history of Taos. There's many other things we can discuss, but I want to stop with my little introductory preamble and kind of hand it back to Bill and see where we're going next. Thank you.
Okay. I think you can hear me without a microphone, yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So the first question is really for you, Kevin. And the question is, talk a little bit about some of the common misconceptions about where Taos people come from and about the world that you live in. What do you hear, and what would you say about it?
Well, first of all, as Paul said, a lot of the information comes from, there's different types of knowledge. Most of the people that do read about Taos Pueblo, it's from the books, okay? What we have, it's all an oral form of history in which we follow, as we say, from time immemorial. And there's a lot of misconceptions about, the length of time we've been here, who we are, where we're from, and whatnot. A lot of people tend to group us together as one people, which we're not. There's over 500 federally recognized tribes here in the United States today. Even as Pueblos, we're not all, related by a common ancestry or even language. Taos Pueblo speaks the native Tiwa, along with the Picaris, the Sandia, and the Isleta Pueblos. Those are different dialects. Different languages include the Tewa, Towa, Keres, and Zuni. So even at that, a lot of people that come to Taos have read about Taos. But again, you never really get the true knowledge until you sit down with people and you talk, with a lot of the elders, because there's a lot of knowledge. But even at that, that's very limited, because there's a fine line between what we can share and what we do and what we don't. And then rightfully too, just because of the whole history, of what we've been put through, again, the whole idea of archaeologists, to me, for me, it's opening my eyes as to now, the role that they play and how they're helping a lot of the native tribes. But before, it was something that was kind of like a bad word. It was like, we don't want you here, we never asked you to be here. We're who we are, we know who we are, but we don't need you to tell us that. But all of this, again, it comes from different ways of learning. Of course, the dominant cultures, they always have a different way of how they perceive and how, even, that's why I'm doing the tours. Just because of the fact that I want people to understand from that native perspective who we really are. So, as far as that, like I said, there's the different types of knowledge. And again, when you sit down with a lot of our elders, and that's very different. That's something that I don't share, just because of the fact that that's a whole different, way of life for us as a native culture. But, what we can, just to get rid of the stereotypes, which there still are. There's still a lot of the ignorance, because people will assume, they'll come to the Pueblo and they're expecting tikis. They're expecting, oh wow, just though that romanticized view of the Pueblo person. And in reality, we have our traditional way of life. We have our ceremonies, our ceremonial dances and whatnot, but we live in two different worlds. You have a more traditional way of life, and you have your more modern.
Thanks, Kevin. Paul, a question for you. Given the sins of archaeologists in the past, how do you think archaeologists could better address their relationship with Native people and improve the dialogue there?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. That's a great question, because I think that archaeologists have a lot of shame. We should have a lot of guilt. We have blood on our hands for what we've done. The archaeological anthropological model in America started probably in the 1860s and 1870s. And the idea was that native tribes, native peoples were vanishing from the continent. And this wasn't totally a false idea, because the push westward of European groups had moved so many tribes out of the eastern part of the country. Here in the Southwest, the Spanish came in, and they weren't about removing people, but they wanted the Pueblos to stay in one place and basically work fields, build giant churches, and support the priests and the Spanish nobility in the Southwest. So in that case, they basically treated Pueblo people and other tribes like enslaved peoples. So there is a long legacy of that. The Americans came in, and we passed through the period where they shelled Taos Pueblo in 1847, killed over 200 innocent people, in the aftermath of Governor Bent being killed. And the Americans basically never relinquished the control over the native peoples in the area. And then when they felt like the tribes were vanishing from the area, they sent in anthropologists and archaeologists to do work, and to do the work without the consent of the tribes, right? So, the archaeologists set to digging up areas that were sacred, that were very important to tribes, and they were targeting human remains, human burials, because of the information potential of those remains. So they essentially mined and extracted thousands, tens of thousands of people from all over the country, who are, to this day, folks, there are still 80,000 Native American ancestors trapped in museums across our country. Okay, there was double that number about 20 years ago, so there's progress being made, but there was a huge article, if you're interested, in the ProPublica publication that really exposes scandals, problems, saying that even with the Native American Grave Repatriation and Protection Act in place 34 years ago in 1990, museums were still not going through the process to get ancestors out of the boxes and the storage areas, returned to tribes, and or reburied in areas that were acceptable to tribal folks. So there's been a lot of light shown on this. They passed modifications to that law this year that has put a lot more teeth in it. It's given the museums about a 5-year time period to go through and take much more concrete steps. So I tell you that because I'm very well aware, I want you to be aware, that the model of archaeology and anthropology was to extract things from native communities. Literally human people, bodies, data, different ideas, knowledge, and asking people like Kevin and elders in places, what are your secrets? We want to learn these things. Some of you may be familiar with the story of Frank Hamilton Cushing. Cushing was sent by the Bureau of American Ethnology in 1901 to Zuni Pueblo. He lived with the Zunis for 2 years, was initiated into one of their societies, learned a lot of secret things, and actually fabricated part of his entry into that society. He then wrote about it and revealed secrets that have damaged Zuni Pueblo to this day, caused irreparable harm from the standpoint of Zuni. I've worked really closely with some folks at Zuni, and I've heard firsthand the damage that was done. So there's a lot that is on the hands of this field of archaeology, and people tend to love archaeology if we're not talking about the controversial sides of it. It's learning about the past. There are noble things in archaeology, but the way it's been pursued in this country in particular, and certainly worldwide in other cases, is shameful. We have a lot to make up for. So that's why I call myself an evolving archaeologist. I have friends who call themselves recovering archaeologists, because we are trying to get off that scientific horse and think about how to balance perspectives and really redress and rework the entire way we think about studying the past, and involving ourselves with partners in different pueblos and different indigenous communities, and saying, what are you interested in? Is there research we can do that doesn't get into sensitive areas, that doesn't get into confidential information that shouldn't be revealed? And are there ways for us to partner? So that's what I'm hoping to do again with the rest of the old career, to really put my efforts and whatever I've done to this point towards that end, to partner more with different folks and really try to understand what matters to them and raise up their voices.
Just to add to that also, a lot of people in this day and age don't really, even, native populations themselves aren't too aware of a lot of the historical traumas that we've endured from the very, very beginnings of colonialism here in this country. Not too long ago, there was an investigative report that came out that was ordered by Deb Holland on the treatment of the native populations in Indian boarding schools. So, those types of effects, there was a lot of burials that, mass graves that were found in a lot of these places. Carlisle Industrial School, for example, in Pennsylvania. So a lot of people don't, I've heard different things, well, history's history, you gotta get over it, move forward. Well, how do you do that after many, many generations of actually being a part of it? We're still a part of it today. I was talking to my mother one day about the name that we have in the family from our Pueblo in San Felipe, which is Townsend. And I never really thought about it until we started talking about where it came from. And that came from Carlisle. One of our great-grandfathers was forced to the Carlisle Industrial School in Pennsylvania. Fortunately, he did come back, but when he did come back, they changed everything about, these children. You couldn't speak your languages, you couldn't, anything dealing with your culture, they tried to take away. That quote, that famous quote, "Kill the Indian, save the man." That was the whole idea of just wiping out that culture, so you don't have that anymore. You can't connect with your people. So, when you look back at how long ago that wasn't very long ago. And, by, realizing that we do have that name of Townsend, it's like, wow, just imagine, what these people felt when they did return, if they did. A lot of ostracism, a lot of just not knowing what to do, and how that trickled down to where we are to this day. And I think that's where a lot of that mistrust from those very, very earlier years comes about, because it's still within our communities today. We're very, very hesitant, to really connect a lot. But at the same time, as we learn, from people like Paul, then it kind of gives us a little bit of an understanding, that other part of it. And that's the whole idea of tonight, is for us to really understand each other. We live in this community together. We all have to take care of one another. So it's these types of things that, that a lot of people don't understand about Native culture. And that's, through the tours that I provide, that's what I try to connect with, for people to really understand that we are one people. All connected together as human beings. As human beings, we all have faults, we all have mistakes in our lives, but at the same time, like in our native language, they say, "Doi naiwa," we're all human. Nobody's perfect in this room here. So, just, I wanted to add a little bit about, how that all came about and where we are, even termination and relocation in the 1950s. And what that did, the government wanted to get rid of its responsibility for Native tribes by sending them into urban areas to seek jobs and whatnot. Imagine coming from a small community like Taos Pueblo, where you're very family oriented, very communal. You're going into an urban area to where it's all individualism, a whole different way of life. Even the effects of moving out of the Pueblo to the days to where it's more individualistic. The days that there wasn't TV, electricity, but you're moving out into homes now to where you have that TV in your home. What did that create? From an agricultural community to more of a wage earning, now money was involved. Corruption, individualism, a lot of greed. And we never knew that as a people, because we all took care of one another. And that's why I say that could always be brought back, not only within our community, but on a larger scale with our community here. We all have those conscious things that we think about before we do them. The water. How many places can you really drink water from the stream? I know for sure you can at Taos Pueblo. Comes straight from that blue lake, comes straight from Bear Lake. Anywhere outside of that, I don't know. And again, those are conscious decisions that have been made over these years to, you know, I was walking down the stream over the summer and I seen all these PVC pipes going into the creek, not knowing what's going in there, outside of Pueblo lands. You know, so those are the types of things, but, we can go on.
A segue from what you just said. We had a conversation that, and you said that probably the greatest threat to us going forward is this. You know, it's, everybody's got a cell phone, and it isolates these individuals within the tribe to focus on the outer world and on their own, you know, chat with one another, rather than on the traditions and so forth. Comment on that a little bit more, would you?
Yeah, you know, just like anything else, it's, you know, it's adapting to the more modern ways of life. How do you adapt to this, but at the same time, in our native language, like they say, mamo, there's a limit to things that we have. But at the same time, you know, how do we pass that on? You know, one night my nieces were arguing over the phone. Oh, she broke it, whatever. And I took that phone away from them, and my mother was still alive, and I said, go in there and sit by your grandma. She's going to tell you about how it was when she first moved here, when she married Grandpa. So they were sitting there, you know, and my mother goes on to tell a story of when she moved from San Felipe, Pueblo, how their life was in the Pueblo. No electricity, no indoor plumbing, no running water. You know, telling them that they slept on the floor. There was where they lived, you know, a lot of the family lived there. They shared everything. You know, but again, a simple way of life, and then, you know, my niece is like, you didn't have a bed, Grandma? You know, those kind of things. Well, but you know, the water, you know, you had to go in the dead of winter to go get your water. You know, but that's then, you know, those are the types of things within, like, it change just like that. So we're still evolving as a Native people today, right now. We're still dealing with a lot of what happened, because up until about the early 70s, majority of the population lived within the Pueblo settlement. You know, but when HUD came in, you know, that a lot of people started to move out, because you're changing from, again, that agricultural economy to the more of the wage earning. And then now what we have phones, we have, like, I didn't even know what a QR code was until, you know, I started my tour business. I was like, I don't know, man. I guess I kind of grew up like that whole way because of my father. You know, he was more of a people person, but you know, I'm very fortunate to be around, to have been around the company that he kept, because they always told stories of how it was way back when. Living in El Salto, our grandparents lived there. They traveled from there to the Pueblo on horseback or on buggy. And one day I was walking up El Salto Road and I ran into an elderly gentleman, said hello, greetings, told him what my family was, and he goes, I remember your grandfather, Jose Maria Cordova. He told me, I got chills, because I didn't know who my grandfather was, but that made me feel like in my heart, like, wow, this is what we need more of. To listen to these elders and their stories, and just to hear them, because they're lonely too. They need us as the younger generation. So it's those connections, you know, hopefully, you know, by sharing this, that, you know, we all can connect that way. You know, get to know each other here. You know, we're all one family, we're all one people. You know, I'm very honored that we have two of our elders from the Pueblo here, you know, that have come in, and it makes me feel good in my heart. So it's, you know, with respect again, you know, that we pass down as much as we can, and that's the whole idea behind what we have today, for all of us to come together. So
Let's take some questions from the audience. I'm sure you all have some. And please speak up so that we can hear you. Yes.
My friend Bernie was reading the newspaper, and she said, let's go check what's happening over there at the theater, so I came. On I'm proud of Kevin, he's one of my relatives. However, you know, who's sitting up there? 3 men.
I'll offer you my seat, you know.
It's a whole different perspective from Pueblo. Before the Spanish came, we were a matriarchal society, and we still hold on to that.
Could you talk about that?
Well, I don't really go into as far as that, you know, that deep, you know, into whatever, like, you know, like I said, as an elder. And what she's saying is true, and, you know, my older brother Harold, he's always been an advocate of the women being involved in any type of thing, even like the government now these days, because right now, of course, you know, it's a male-dominated patriarchal society that we live in. And that goes on with politics and everything else too, but then again, through tradition, and how far do we go back? How do we make changes like that? Like she said in the very beginning, it being a matriarchal society. You know, and those are the types of things, you know, that we learn, you know, from people like this. And it's always a blessing to have them here that way. You don't forget what they have to say. It means sitting down and, you know, kimatea ki unai no antatina going up there one that ke about how we do my heart. She went up about kind of my and I'm about you the I know you know, it is true, you know what she said, that we do have to have that representation like that, and it's with all due respect, you know, that I do take that, you know, tall, kana.
I just want to make one more remark. At our Pueblo, and I think at all Pueblos too, in all our gatherings, our ceremonial gatherings, just our celebrations, you know, it's usually been like the 3 of you sitting up there to address the audience. But one thing the men always say to us, and I tell the younger generation, the younger women, listen to these words because they're very powerful. They tell us, if it was not for you women, we wouldn't be anywhere. We wouldn't be anything. So, when we're at our women's activities, that's where I tell the young women, I said, those are powerful words. You have to stand up to that. That's what makes you a Pueblo woman. Because you have the men behind you, that you're in the front.
And then again, that's the whole reason why we're here, you know, is to hear different voices like that. That way we can come together. And that's, you know, one of the main reasons, like I said, I want people to be able to hear from different voices. That way we can understand and move forward together.
Question?
What I want to make a comment is that I was born and raised at the Pueblo in a traditional way. Yes, my dad is from South Dakota, and my mother is here, the Suazo family in Gomez. What has always bothered me all my time that I was born in the Pueblo is that my dad was in the Army. And back then, women at the Pueblo were not allowed to marry anybody outside of the Pueblo. However, my mother went to California to work, and she met my dad, who was from South Dakota, and they got married. And she was afraid to tell her parents. So on furlough, my dad came to look for my mother, and the governor from the Pueblo had him thrown in jail. Just because he married my mother. And it ruined our whole life because we never had a father, we never knew, because he hated the Pueblo after they did that to him. So they put him in jail, and the Army came and got him. Because I guess you're not allowed to put an Army guy in jail. And so that has always bothered me, and it still does, and I just feel like it's a misogynistic world out there. We cannot tell our girls, you might be governor someday, you should go to school and learn all these things so that you can be a leader in the Pueblo, just like the men, because we are just as smarter than most men. At least I know that's what my grandfather told me. My grandfather said, women, he told me, you do not know how to use your power. And it always played on my mind. And he said, if you knew how to use your power, you could not be in the situation you're in. He said, because you women are more powerful, but you don't know how to use your power. So, thank you.
Paul, how many different tribes and pueblos are matrilineal, would you say?
Most of them are matrilineal in origin. Taos has become more matrilineal through time, I think. Kevin, is that right? But I think really originally matrilineal.
Yeah, originally, like you
Yeah.
said, but like now, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just,
The groups in the west, Hopi, Zuni, Yakima, Laguna, and a good number of the Keres groups up and down the Rio Grande have matrilineal roots. The Navajo are very matrilineal. So it's kind of a mix countrywide, but I think probably the majority of the tribes in the country through time have been matrilineal and matrilocal, which means you marry and you move to where your wife's family is from. So the Europeans came in, obviously very patriarchal, and they went to the pueblos. The Spanish went to the pueblos and said, we need one man to talk to. We can't talk to a council, we can't talk to women. We want one man, and you're gonna have a governor, so decide who your governor is. So that structure, that secular structure was imposed on the pueblos and imposed on tribes nationwide because of what the Europeans wanted, who they wanted to deal with, which was usually a single man or two.
I'd like to hear a little bit of history on the canes in the Pueblo, specifically Taos Pueblo, that were given to the leaders.
through the Spanish government. Yeah, I don't know, but I'm at will, I really not really sure how far that goes into it, but then again, you know, every new year that tribal officials are elected into tribal government, those canes have been passed down generation upon generations, and those canes were initiated from the very beginning by the Spanish when they first came here, which would represent give into tribal leadership to represent their authority in these communities. And as the years have passed down, I think most recently in 1987 or 1991, they received another cane from the King of Spain when he was in Santa Fe. And there's also one that they carry that was given by Abraham Lincoln and Richard Nixon. So it's a symbol of the authority of the tribal government that they carry on. And that, for them, that's a very big part of the history as well. And again, of course, talking about the matriarchal, patriarchal, there are different pueblos, Yakima being one, and when you do marry, then it's usually through the women that you go to their home. And in other communities, if it's the man, if it's patriarchal, you go to the male is the home that you go to. But all possessions usually for the matriarchal societies belong to the women, like the home, the lands, and so forth, but that differs.
Well, when I was growing up, I remember there were these issues like children born out of wedlock, and the children were always protected. The women were able to collect possessions like land so that the child would have a home and be brought up. And it usually came from the male's family. They had to pay the unborn child if it was a situation where the father wasn't going to provide and take care of the child. And with the canes, I'm half Yakima. I was talking to one of my uncles who was married into the Taos Pueblo tribe, and I said, did you go, and he was a tribal official, held many positions in Yakima. I said, Uncle, did you go to the celebration when they were giving out the canes? And he said, no. He said, did you know that Acoma was the only pueblo that boycotted this gathering? Because we gave a message and said, we're not going to honor those canes until they return our children that they took into Mexico.
Another question? Yeah.
Kevin, you said that the history is passed down orally. Is there concerns that it's going to be lost? Or how are you guys working to preserve that? Because I'm sure Paul, as the anthropologist, couldn't wait to get their hands on, be able to record it or do something to help you with keeping your records going there. So what does the Pueblo do to allow that oral history to continue?
Well, first and foremost, like it's within the family where it all starts. But of course, over the years, they've implemented into like the school system language immersion classes and whatnot to reinforce that. So there are programs that have been put into schools, but the whole thing about that as well, that I think that there really needs to be more attention placed on that in terms of developing more curriculum towards culture, towards language, so that can be retained, because just like anything else, as the generations pass on, a lot of that, because of technology, because of the influences on the outside, it has an impact. The other Pueblo that I'm from in San Felipe, my daughter's fluent. That everybody in my family there is fluent, because that's just something that they've all every day within the family. And that's what makes me very proud to be able to know that there are communities that are keeping that. And it would be worth consulting and finding out. And a lot of it is just the proximity to other major cities or whatnot as well. Taos is a big tourist attraction, people coming in and whatnot, so there's different factors, but it would be a good idea to do a worthwhile study and see what can be done in order to preserve that. Like I said, it's something that's spoken from the elders all the way down to the children, but it's really up to the families, to the parents, really.
One thing I would say, since you asked about what the anthropologists have done, is the example of Frank Hamilton Cushing was one where he recorded and then shared things that should have never been shared. So if any anthropologist doing this work today would only do that with full consent of whatever group, and it would be for them only and not for the rest of the world. So this, I think, is something that people sometimes have trouble wrapping their heads around, is that there are things that are just for Taos Pueblo, different societies in Taos Pueblo. They may not share those even across those lines. My friends at Zuni tell me there are things they learn in this group or that group, and they don't get shared across those group boundaries. So there's a great deal of confidentiality at many, many different levels. So if someone comes in from the outside and writes about that, shares that with a larger audience, it is very, very damaging. So I think at this point, it's, the people who are doing what I'm trying to do correctly would only assist Taos Pueblo or another group in a way that was most useful for them. And the other thing, I did a project with Acoma Pueblo about 6 years ago, and we went through a very careful process of meeting with the tribal council, with the governor, with their cultural team, and we actually signed a non-disclosure agreement before we went out in the field and collected a lot of information for a week. Which, in that NDA, that's the acronym, left all of the information in the hands of Acoma to do with as they felt. And at the end of the project, we came away with some recommendations, which we were able to share with BLM around Chaco and the Farmington area. But some of the other information, Acoma felt like was too sensitive, and they kept it to themselves. And we knew going into that was the way it should be, because a big part of that project was collecting information and taking Acoma elders and young people out to places they had never seen, but which they knew from different songs or dances. And so we were able to help them reconnect to those places. But that was the beginning, the middle, and the end of it. So there was no publication that came out of that. There was simply information for the Pueblo to use internally. And so that, in my mind, is the only way to do ethical work today, is with full consent up front. And nothing gets shared unless the people you're working with want to see it shared. And that's not a single thing where you ask once, you continue to go through a process. And ultimately, if there are concerns, then it stays with the Pueblo. And that's really the only way it can be done, in my view.
I have a question for Kevin. Kevin, what do you think about Elsa Cruz Parsons' book?
Well,
And what she wrote all
Repeat
about the
that.
Kivas and the ceremonies?
Elsie Clues Parsons. I came across that book over at the Center for Southwest Research, but that goes into depth. You know, almost like what Paul is saying about how all that information was brought out and now is actually published. And the only, you can't take that out of the library there, but you know, that goes, you know, it really, really goes in depth about different clans, even the names of the clans, the leaders, the whole, I think that ethnography back then, I think even then, so they did a lot of the carbon dating, and I don't know how that was ever allowed to come into the Pueblo and have that done, but it's these types of things that, you know, need to be left alone. You know, those are the types of things that have been exposed, and that's what causes that mistrust of people that come in and not have that understanding of what it means to us as a Native people. Because there are things that don't need to be discussed outside of who we are as a Native population.
Mike?
Question for you, Kevin. Looking from the outside into the culture of Native Americans, just traveling around, what seems to be ubiquitous is the casino. And I'm curious, what role does the casino play in the culture and the economics of the Pueblo?
Well, that, as far as different things like that, again, you know, you go into the whole thing of tribal government and transparency as to, okay, well, where is the funding going and whatnot, and just like anything else, we don't have a democracy. There's a lot of that we don't know that happens, that, you know, a lot of decisions that are made without the general public. You know, myself, you know, personally, this is my own personal opinion, you know, of course, gambling is a vice, you know, and now, you know, that was really geared towards, you know, the tourist that was going to be visiting Taos Pueblo, but you don't see tourists that are, it's people from our own Pueblo, locals from the communities that, you know, are on a limited income. You know, the first of the month they're at the casino, you know, and everybody has their choice, yes, but at the same time, there's other forms of economic development, you know, that we could come up with that would be more geared towards our culture, you know, and educating people, versus, you know, and again, that's another thing about those stereotypes about Native people. Oh, they have money, they have a casino, they don't pay taxes, they don't, you know, that kind of a thing. But yeah, and you know, and it does. Just like the Hale Creek and the sale of alcohol there, you know, morally, you know, based on what's happened to our people because of all of that, why would our own tribe want to do something like that? But again, a lot of the decisions that are made, we don't have a voice in, and that's just how it's been for a long, long time.
One more question.
When we look at the global situation and climate change, what can we learn from tribes?
Well, you know, since way before, you know, the ecology of, you know, what we've always, you know, practiced as a Native people. You know, like I say, you know, to wake up every morning with those prayers for Mother Earth. You know, those are the types of things that, you know, living the way we lived as a Native people, we were always told that that was the wrong way to live. Oh, you know, we always had that view of we were inferior and we couldn't live that way, that it wasn't the way to live. But now, how long did it take for this whole world to be where it's at now? It didn't take very long. So you get a lot of people that are writing books on ecology and whatnot, and one day I read one and I was like, wow, pretty interesting how depth it goes into, but when in reality it's like, wow, I really didn't have to read a book because all of that knowledge, you know, our ancestors knew and still practice. You know, so again, you know, it's from different, you know, points of view and how you connect with the land. You know, and on my tours, people will ask, you know, about, you know, there's a lot of people that are doing healing and stuff like that, and it's not, I don't ever consider myself a healer. It's what you get from the Mother Earth. Sitting next to a stream and listening to that water flow, being able to drink from it, and you know, be able to understand what's around you, just the sound of the birds, the wind in the trees, you know, that's healing in itself. You know, but the dominant societies might be like, oh, well, emotionally I'm not feeling good, I gotta go to the mall and buy something. You know? It could be materialistic, you know, but yeah, there's so much going on now that you see it. Right now, I mean, we're not getting as much snow as we used to get. This summer was like, the heat was so intense, it's like, wow, you know, and then people are, wow, what's going on, you know, and we gotta, like I said, those conscious decisions, you know, if we don't get snow, then they wanna do seed clouding, you know, and those are types of things that we don't mess with as a native culture. That's not, we're not gods, you know, we're not the creator. You know, you have to let the creator take its path, and we're stewards of the land. We're not here to abuse it, you know, take it for what it is and whatnot, but you know, those are the types of things that, you know, based on native cultures, the way we've always lived.
So, summary comment, Paul, and then one for you, Kevin.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming, and I want to thank Kevin and Bill for setting this up and having a recovering archaeologist who hopefully is continuing to evolve. And I think we want to do more of these in the future, and so I would tell folks to stay tuned. And yeah, you know, I mean, I don't want folks to come away thinking I'm a hater of archaeology. I trained in this and I learned this, but we are all capable of evolving and understanding things through time. So that's kind of the message I want to give you, and I want you to really also take to heart what Kevin has said, because I think he has great wisdom.
And then in closing, you know, I just want to thank everybody for coming out here this evening. You know, as Paul said, he's a recovering archaeologist or whatnot, but you know, like everybody's recovering from something, you know. You know, myself, I'm a recovering alcoholic, you know, and you know, for me, you know, like I'm truthful with people in what I say. I've learned that from my dad. My father was a very good person to me. You know, he was my best friend. I lost my father about 10 years ago, and I believe, you know, the path that he led, himself being an alcoholic, you know, we had many a conversation about where that would lead me. And, you know, he was just straight up with me. You know, he never beat around the bush, and told me one day, you know, if you want to be a damn good alcoholic, be a damn good alcoholic. You'll find out where you're going to be. And I followed that path. And you know, I'm very fortunate to be sitting here in front of all of you here today. And that's why for me, what I do, I always do from my heart. I don't, you know, beat around the bush with anybody. I'll tell you straight up, you know, how I feel. And for tonight, you know, like I say, how I feel about everybody here, you know, we're all human beings. We're all here to connect on one level or another, you know, and you know, hopefully we can all learn from one another. We're all human beings together. You know, that's all that I wish for this community, for our people, for all humanity, is that we learn to respect one another, that we learn how to take care of one another, acknowledge one another, like they always tell us, you know, in our native language, you know, acknowledge your people, say hello, good morning, the elders in this audience, you mean a lot because, you've lived a long life. And there's always that respect that's given to the elder community. Domina, ka, tita. Those are words that, are passed down for generation upon generation, and that's how we learn in our native community to be able to have that respect for all cultures, for our people. But again, like I said, it's with a good heart that I'm here, to share this with all of you. And my intentions and what I've started, I believe, come from a long, long time ago, through my father and how he taught me, to respect people. Anything that you have, give a little back. Help people. Those are the words that he always left with me. He helped a lot of people out in our community. I know there's that other part of it, like he would say sometimes when he was a governor, hello, all my friends, my enemies, But, he was just that type of person that was, because there was a lot of jealousy in that community towards my father. Just like Bernadette said. We went through burned corrals, hay bales, burned businesses. But my dad always said, well, what the hell are we going to do? Just start again, And that's, for me, I hope to, carry that message wherever I go of respect. And I have a lot of respect for all of you coming out and taking that initiative to be here tonight on a cold night. And to be out and just to listen, from a different perspective. That's what we all need. We all need to hear one another. So if you're all ever interested, again, I got brochures here. I do the Whitefeather Native Cultural Tours. We do tours of a buffalo ranch that my father started about 40 some years ago. We've always been raised with cattle, with horses, now buffalo. Like my dad said, I used to raise halibut, now I raise buffalo. And I told him, I don't know, Dad, you still do that too. So. But yeah, like they say, my dad's name was Morning Talk. And like I say, sometimes they would tell him at Michael's kitchen, he'd go in there, damn, Jimmy boy, aren't you done? Morning's gonna go, well, I'll talk all darn day about it. Or like he would say, until that bull starts getting a little thick, then we know when to stop. But again, it's with a good heart that, and I really, really thank all of you for coming out and come out to visit the Pueblo. Don't be strangers, we're neighbors, we're all brothers, we're all sisters here. So you come out for feast days that we have, any of the activities, and feel welcome to visit. And thank you again for coming out this evening. Tawiwa.
We'll set some refreshments out up in the gallery, and anybody.
And before we end here, like I said, we started at the beginning with a prayer, and I would just ask one of the elders here to close us out with a small prayer. Kana, we all went kumala.
You don't need to stand. Oh, be comfortable. Yeah. Go ahead, sit down. I do that because, when we're in our ceremonial places, we don't stand up, we sit down. We're seated. So, we're seated in the Ta tiljonen matsui and matola one he not the talking queenie. I came up here on the time on higher. Mana no itenta ma paselwan kaba yaho no itenta kill to batik matzet on a cool queen naki upon hilik knocking up there tierra ituma no I am wind I am iwan who who no come we want him at Seattle. He knocking up by way, but he cannot win when Ta, but all the one you pia wana hina toina I pia nei hawa. Hili iun tai tu I ua wana nai wa mama Yut na kai o tinen mawani Apa I o wa mama I wana iun ta nai tu mai iun ta ki pāna tu ta mawani munu ko pia.
Oh.
I want to tell a small story. You know, well, you talked about language revitalization. I was one of the Hawaiians were big in that movement. They were the forerunners of the language immersion program among Native people. So the tribe got funds for Native language revitalization. I went to the school. I applied for the position of the coordinator. I got the position, and I went into the schools, and I wanted to listen to the children. I would talk to them in my language, and they were saying, "She's talking Spanish." No, she's talking like the people that come to visit our pueblo. No, she's talking like when my grandpa died, and they were crying at the funeral. You know, our language. It wasn't their language. It was another age group. So, and I went many different places visiting with Native people to talk about the state of their language. But one day I was sitting in a big audience in Washington, D.C., and they were having a conference, and I was sitting beside an old Lakota man, and every time someone would say something profound, the audience would clap. And he nudged me like this. He said, "Have you been to the Washington Zoo?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "I went to this." He said, "Did you go see the monkeys?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Did you see they do this?" So I'm self-conscious about clapping everything.